Hey everybody, this is chapter 3 of um, Matthias Küntzel's Nazis, Islamic Antisemitism in the Middle East, the 1948 Arab War against Israel and the Aftershocks of World War II by Matthias Küntzel. The chapter is titled 1939 to 1945, Goebbels in Arabic. Here we go. In Nazi propaganda, the spoken word ranked higher than the written. In Germany itself, the human voice was given pride of place at mass rallies, while to arouse Arabs, the Nazis used their second most important propaganda instrument, the short-wave radio transmitter. With top-quality presenters and polished programming, Islamic anti-Semitism was disseminated to the Muslim world in Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, and Hindi. Technically advanced shortwave radio offered an entertainment and information medium with a great power of attraction. In his memoirs, Grand Ayatollah Hussein al-Montazeri recalls the installation of a radio in an Isfahan coffee house at the end of the 1930s. Quote, thousands of people had come to see and hear the radio, including Montazeri himself, who was wondering, quote, what is a radio, end quote. I'm going to look up Ayatollah Hussein al-Montazeri. Wikipedia says Grand Ayatollah Hussein al-Montazeri, who looks like Colin Farrell, lived from September 1922 to 2009 and was an Iranian Shia Islamic theologian, Islamic democracy advocate, writer, and human rights activist. He was one of the leaders of the Iranian Revolution and one of the highest-ranking authorities in Shia Islam. Hussein Ali Montazeri was once the designated successor to the revolution's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Ayatollah Khamenei and Hussein al-Montazeri had a falling out in 1989 over government policies that Montazeri claimed infringed on people's freedom and denied them their rights, especially after the 1988 mass execution of political prisoners. Montazeri spent his later years in QOM, and remained politically influential in Iran, but was placed on house arrest in 1997 for questioning, quote, the unaccountable rule exercised by the supreme leader, end quote, Ali Khamenei, who succeeded Ruhollah Khomeini. Grand Ayatollah Hussein Ali Montazeri was known as the most knowledgeable senior Islamic scholar in Iran, a Grand Marja, religious authority, of Shia Islam, and was said to be one of Khamenei's teachers. For more than 2 decades, Montazeri was one of the main critics of the Islamic Republic's domestic and foreign policy. He had also been an active advocate of Baha'i faith rights, civil rights, and women's rights in Iran. Montazeri was a prolific writer of books and articles. Montazeri was a staunch proponent of an Islamic State and he argued that post-revolutionary Iran was not being ruled as an Islamic state. Back to the text. On the 25th of April 1939, the Nazis' first Arabic-language broadcast came on air. The last would be on the 26th of April 1945. This 6-year barrage of sound embedded Islamic anti-Semitism in the consciousness of the, quote, Arab street, unquote, and continued to exert its influence even in the post-war period. The use of radio was pioneered by the Italian leader Benito Mussolini, who understood that the mass of Muslims could only be reached in this way. In 1945, the illiteracy rate in Egypt was almost 80%, and in Libya, 85%. In Palestine in 1931, 75%, and in 1947, 67% of Muslim men could not read. Footnote. See Jeffrey Herf's article, Nazi Germany's Propaganda Aimed at Arabs and Muslims During World War II and the Holocaust, Old Themes, New Archival Findings. You couldn't hear that, but that's me waving around an electric fly swatter. Anyway. And footnote. In March 1934, a radio body went on air with Arabic speakers and music. And it's a radio. I looked this up before. It's a radio it's a radio station in Italy, I believe. Yeah. I'm not going to read the whole Wikipedia, but radio Bari station broadcasting from Bari in southern Italy with a power of 20 kilowatts was commissioned by the Italian National Broadcasting Company, EIAR, in 1932. So, in the fascist era. Back to the text. In March 1934, Radio Bari went on air with Arabic speakers and music. In those days, listening to the radio was a public occasion. People did so in coffee houses and bazaars. Sometimes the radio would be placed on a pedestal in the town square, around which the information hunger would gather. Sometimes a set located in the mayor's garden would provide a meeting point for the village elders. What had been heard would immediately then be talked about, further extending the reach of the program's message. It has been estimated that by the start of the 1940s, quote, about 1 million people were regularly listening to the radio in the Middle East and North Africa, end quote. Footnote. According to Hans Goldenbaum, quote, given the fact that the number of recipients of the radio broadcast in, for example, coffee houses was located in the high double or triple digits, the total should probably be adjusted upwards, end quote. End footnote. In addition, Mussolini hit on a ruse for entrenching Radio Bari's position. Mussolini sent, quote, to Arab cafes as the centers of social life free receivers built in such a way that they could only pick up a very narrow frequency range that corresponded to the relevant Italian wavelengths, end quote. In this way, he ensured that Arab cafe audiences, quote, sipped their coffee and swallowed Italian propaganda with every mouthful, end quote, as one observer remarked. Footnote. See Calum A. MacDonald's article, Radio Bari, Italian Wireless Propaganda in the Middle East and British Countermeasures, 1934 to 1938, published in Middle East Studies in 1977. See also the book by Heinz Pohle, Der Rundfunk als Instrument der Politik. Dissertation, Hamburg, 1953. End footnote. It was Said Imam, an associate of the Mufti, who at the end of 1937 first urged the German Nazis to set up their own Arabic radio operation. The German Foreign Office supported the proposal after some hesitation, and in light of the fact that by 1938 not only France, Japan, and the Soviet Union, but also the British BBC had begun to broadcast in Arabic. The first trial broadcast directed at the Middle East took place in March 1939, and the official program began at the end of April. In World War II, in addition to the land, sea, and air wars, there was also a radio war. By October 1939, German shortwave transmitters were broadcasting in 15 different foreign languages. However, of all the foreign language broadcasting units, the quote Orient Zone end quote was given quote absolute priority end quote. It broadcast to Arabs, Turks, Persians, and Indians, and employed about 80 people, including some 20 presenters and translators. Editorial control was in the hands of the Foreign Office Radio Policy Department, and the program content was determined in cooperation with the Propaganda Ministry and the Wehrmacht High Command's Foreign Propaganda Department. Footnote. See Klaus Michael Maumann and Martin Kuppers, Hauptmann und Hakenkreuz, Die Dritte Reich, Die Araber und Palästina, published in 2006. End footnote. The broadcasts were recorded in number 77 Kaiser Dom in Berlin and then transferred by a special telephone line to Seesen, a small village 40 kilometers south of Berlin. The transmitter system in Seesen were equipped with state-of-the-art directional antennae. In 1938, American radio expert Caesar Searchinger described the huge shortwave radio complex in Seesen as, quote, the biggest and most powerful propaganda machine in the world, end quote, and its, quote, supremely cunning technology of mass influence, end quote, as, quote, the most formidable institution for the dissemination of a political doctrine that the world has ever seen, end quote. Footnote. I use the terms Radio Seesen and Radio Berlin interchangeably. End footnote. Wikipedia says Caesar Searchinger, if my internet will fucking cooperate, Lived from 1884 to 1971 and was a French-American broadcaster, musicologist, and writer. The New York Times referred to Caesar Scherzinger as a, quote, pioneer in transatlantic radio broadcasting, end quote. His books included The Way Out of War in 1940 and a biography of the pianist Arthur Schnabel in 1958. Back to the text. While exaggerated, the assessment is not wholly false. The, quote, cunning technology of mass influence, end quote, included so-called Geheimsender, parenthesis, quote, secret stations, end quote, parenthesis, directed from Berlin under the codename Concordia A. One of them was known as the Voice of the Free Arabs. Saud al-Uruba al-Hurra. Which masqueraded as the mouthpiece of an Egyptian pan-Arab liberation movement. That was also it looks like that was also the name of, or a similar name was also used for the Egyptian radio service in the Nasser era. It says, Voice of the Arabs, or Salt al-Arab, was one of the first and most prominent Egyptian transnational Arabic language radio services. Based in Cairo, the service became known to many Arabs and non alike as the main medium through which former Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser spread his messages of an Arab unity and revolutions across the Arab world. Despite its unmatched popularity in most of the 1950s and 1960s, the service no longer commands a large audience and does not play a significant role in domestic Egyptian or regional politics. Back to the text. The fact that it was broadcasting from Berlin was concealed. The official Nazi stations, Berlin auf Arabisch, Berlin in Arabic, Bari auf Arabisch, and from 1941 onward, Aten auf Arabisch, could be held responsible for what they broadcast. The Voice of Free Arabs, on the other hand, could spread the crudest propaganda and the most outrageous fabrications, so long as the speakers took sufficient care to provide local, quote, Egyptian, end quote, color. German press agencies could then take up the disinformation and pass it on if it were authentic. Another secret station, the Arab Nation, started broadcasting in November 1941 from Greece, and a third, the Free Voice of Egypt, did so from Italy. By the start of 1940, Season was broadcasting 2 programs in standard Arabic every day. From late summer onwards, this was increased to 3 a day with a combined duration of 95 minutes. There was, in addition, a Moroccan program lasting about an hour. In May 1941, the Voice of the Free Arabs began a daily 30-minute broadcast. By mid-1942, colloquial Arabic was increasingly being used in the broadcast. As the military action moved to North Africa, Season started broadcasting in the North African Arab and Berber dialects. 2 Moroccan programs purporting to be of French origin were for a time broadcast over the Paris Mondial transmitter. Footnote. See Willi A. Bulka, Die Macht des Radios, Weltpolitik und Auslandsrundfunk, 1924 to 1976. End footnote. The timing of the broadcast was carefully staggered. For example, on the 4th of July 1942, Berlin in Arabic ran at 19:30, followed by Bali in Arabic at 20. I guess that's 2100 hours. I don't know. 2000 hours. And 2015. It was the turn of the first run of the Voice of the Free Arabs, followed by a repeat at 21:15. Footnote. Kirk to Secretary of State, number 502, 21st of July, 1942, Axis broadcast in Arabic, 3rd to 9th of July, 1942, 3 to 6, National Archives, College Park, NACP, RG-84, Egypt, Cairo, Embassy, General Records, 1936 to 1955. End footnote. New section. The season's shortwave radio station. While all the combatant powers in World War II used secret stations, the season operation had some special features. First, the overhaul of the season equipment carried out in preparation for the 1936 Berlin Olympics had greatly improved its long-range sound quality. No other station provided a better listening experience than Season. Second, the Orient Zone editors succeeded in recruiting Yunus Bari, formerly of Iraqi Radio, as their announcer. Footnote. See Fritz Grobe, Iraq, Berlin, 1941. Wikipedia says Yunus Saleh Bali al-Juburi, who lived from 1903 to 1979, was an Iraqi traveler, journalist, broadcaster, and writer. He was born in 1903 or January 1904 in Mosul, Iraq, and was nicknamed the, quote, sailor, end quote, for having graduated as a naval officer from a military school in Istanbul. In 1921, Yunus Bari continued his education in the Cavalry Military School in Munich, where he met Adolf Hitler. Yunus Bari is known for writing many books and has traveled to several countries and is said to have mastered 17 languages, including English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Turkish. At the height of Yunus Bari's career, Yunus Bari founded multiple radio stations, including the first Arab radio station, Arab Radio of Berlin, or on the European continent in 1939, broadcasting his famous catchphrase, quote, "This is Berlin, the neighborhood of Arabs," end quote, from Germany to the Arab world. On air, he would make speeches in which he would insult political leaders at the time. Bari also met some of the most famous and influential people of his time, and was sentenced to death 4 times. The nature of Yunus Bari's work and the multitude of professions Yunus Bari maintained made him a highly controversial figure. Yunus Bari took up numerous lines of work, most notably during his time in India, where he was a monk by day and a dancer by night. While there, Yunus Bari still managed to find time to work as a reporter for an Indian newspaper. Yunus Bari was mufti in Indonesia, an editor-in-chief for a newspaper in Java, an imam in Paris, and an advisor to King Idris of Libya, and was therefore known as, quote, the legend of the earth, end quote. Back to the text. With Yunus Bari's incisive voice, the ability to modulate the volume of his voice, and aggressive speeches that sometimes spilled over into rants, Yunus Bari's program soon became a trademark. Footnote: see David Motadel, Islam and Nazi Germany's War, published in 2014. End footnote. Bari opened up all his programs with verses from the Quran and peppered his presentations with witty, cynical remarks. Quote, among highly cultivated listeners, he has even been named, quote, Prince of Speakers, end quote, a, quote, cultured Arab, end quote. His report on, quote, Arab announcers in Radio Berlin, end quote, rests in the records of the Wehrmacht High Command, wrote in 1942, quote, the enemy press criticizes Yunus Bari, describing Yunus Bari as an, quote, exact copy of his master, end quote, i.e. the Führer, end quote. Third, the season broadcast employed a crude and folksy anti-Semitism. Jew hatred was the core of Nazi doctrine, but in this context it was also a tactical ploy to win over the audience. On this topic, facts were irrelevant and incitement everything. Thus the United Nations, already in the making from the start of 1942, was derided as the, quote, United Jewish Nations, end quote, and Emir Abdullah of Transjordan was mocked as Rabbi Abdullah for his moderate stance. Excuse me. Abdullah I of Jordan lived from 1882 to 1951 and was the ruler of Jordan and Jordan's predecessor state, Transjordan, from 1921 until Abdullah I's assassination in 1951. Abdullah I of Jordan was the Emir of Transjordan, a British protectorate until 1946, when Abdullah I became king of an independent Transjordan, shortened to Jordan in 1949. As a member of the Hashemite dynasty, the royal family of Jordan since 1921, Abdullah I was a 38th generation direct descendant of Muhammad. Born in Mecca, Hejaz, Ottoman Empire, Abdullah I was the second of four sons of Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Mecca, and his first wife, Abdiya bint Abdullah. He was educated in Istanbul and Hejaz. From 1909 to 1914, Abdullah sat in the Ottoman legislature as deputy for Mecca, but allied with Britain during the First World War. During the war, he played a key role in secret negotiations with the United Kingdom that led to the Great Arab Revolt against Ottoman rule that was led by his father, Sharif Hussein. Abdullah personally led guerrilla raids on garrisons. Abdullah became Emir of Transjordan in April 1921. Abdullah I upheld his alliance with the British during World War II and became king after Transjordan gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1946. In 1949, Jordan annexed the West Bank, which angered Arab countries including Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Abdullah I was assassinated in Jerusalem while attending Friday prayers at the entrance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque by a Palestinian. In 1951, Abdullah was succeeded by his eldest son, Talal. Back to the text. Footnote. See Neville Barbour's article, Broadcasting to the Arab World, Arabic transmissions from the BBC and other non-Arab stations, published in Middle East Journal, 1951. And footnote. With regard to Fakhri Nashashibi, a prominent opponent of the Mufti in Palestine, the Mufti in Palestine, the station claimed that, quote, the Jews provide Fakhri Nashashibi with all the money he desires, ... Fakhri and Fakhri's people visit Jewish houses at night, ... hatching plots and conspiring before returning home before daylight with rich pickings in the form of young Jewesses, end quote. Footnote, see, this is a citation, see Die Arabische Sendung aus Berlin, 1939, in the Zionistisches Central Archive, Jerusalem, section 20. It's tedious archival stuff. But now I'm going to look up Fakhri Nashashibi. We've already looked up his family. They were a prominent family in Palestine. Anyway. Back to the text. A report dated the 13th of October 1939 on the impact of German radio propaganda prepared in Palestine for the British War Office described the style. Quote, in general, it may be said that the middle, lower, middle, and lower classes listen to the Arabic broadcasts from Berlin with a good deal of enjoyment. They like the racy, quote, juicy, end quote, stuff, which is put over, ... but not even the credulous Arab of the humbler strata of society can swallow everything the Germans put on the air, ... What the average Palestinian Arab does imbibe, however, is the anti-Jew material. This he wants to hear and to believe, and he does both. To that extent, German propaganda is definitely effective, end quote. Footnote, British National Archives, WO 208-1701, German Propaganda, 13th of October, 1939. End footnote. New section. In Muslim garb. The fourth distinguishing feature of this radio propaganda, its Islamic orientation, was tactically motivated. The Nazis were initially divided as to whether they should play the Islamic or the nationalist card to mobilize Muslims. One of their early idols was Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who had cast off the shackles of Islam and banned the, quote, dervishness, end quote, from Turkey, end quote, as Hitler remarked admiringly in April 1942. What the fuck does dervishness mean? AI Overview says... Oh no, there's a Wikipedia. The AI Overview seems actually simpler. It refers to a state or condition of being a dervish, which is a term used in Islam, particularly with Sufism, to describe members of a religious fraternity or religious mendicant dedicated to a life of poverty and devotion. And we all know Ataturk, or I know Ataturk, but I want to review him because I want to sharpen up here. Wikipedia says Mustafa Kemal Ataturk lived from 1881 to 1938. He was a Turkish field marshal and revolutionary statesman. He was the founding father of the Republic of Turkey, serving as the Republic of Turkey's first president from 1923 until his death in 1938. Mustafa Ataturk undertook sweeping reforms which modernized Turkey into a secular, industrializing nation. Ideologically a secularist and nationalist, Mustafa Ataturk's policies and socio-political theories became known as Kemalism. Kemal Ataturk came to prominence for his role in securing the Ottoman victory at the Battle of Gallipoli, 1915, during World War I. During this time, the Ottoman Empire perpetrated genocides against its Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian subjects. Whenever involved, Ataturk went to condemn them and would later grant immunity to remaining. I don't know. This is a weird sentence. During this time, the Ottoman Empire perpetrated genocide against its Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian subjects. While never involved, Ataturk went to condemn them and would later grant immunity to remaining perpetrators. I don't know what that means. Condemn? Who is them? Condemn the Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrians? I don't know. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, Ataturk led the Turkish national movement, which resisted the Ottoman Empire's partition among the victorious Allied powers, establishing a provisional government in the present-day Turkish capital, Ankara. Ataturk defeated the forces sent by the Allies, thus emerging victorious from what was later referred to as the Turkish War of Independence. Ataturk subsequently proceeded to abolish the Ottoman Sultanate in 1922 and proclaimed the foundation of the Turkish Republic in its place the following year. As the president of the newly formed Turkish Republic, Ataturk initiated a rigorous program of political, economic, and cultural reforms with the ultimate aim of building a republican and secular nation-state. Ataturk made primary education free and compulsory, opening thousands of new schools all over the country. Ataturk also introduced the Latin-based Turkish alphabet. Turkish women received equal civil and political rights during his presidency. Ataturk's government carried out a policy of Turkification, trying to create a homogeneous, unified, and above all secular nation under the Turkish banner. The Turkish parliament granted Ataturk the surname Ataturk in 1934, which means, quote, father of Turks, end quote, in recognition of his role played in the building of the modern Turkish Republic. Sorry, I guess I should have been calling, I thought Mustafa, stupid me, was like the title name, so I was calling him Ataturk before, but I should have been calling him Mustafa Kemal prior to. I knew he had a title in his name, I wasn't sure which one. Anyway, the Turkish parliament granted. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk died on the 10th of November 1938 at Dome Baş Palace in Istanbul at the age of 57. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was succeeded as president by his longtime Prime Minister, İsmet İnönü. In 1981, the centennial of Ataturk's birth, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's memory was honored by the United Nations and UNESCO, which declared it the Ataturk Year in the world and adopted the resolution on the Ataturk Centennial, describing Ataturk as, quote, the leader of the first struggle given against colonialism and imperialism, end quote. Ataturk was also credited for his peace in the world-oriented foreign policy and friendships with the neighboring countries such as Iran, Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Greece, as well as the creation of the Balkan Pact that resisted the expansionist aggression of fascist Italy and Tsarist Bulgaria. Okay, back to the text. Footnote. See Henry Picker's book, Hitler's Tischgespräche in Vorhauptquartier, 1941 to 1942. End footnote. Wait, no, the other footnote is Stefan Ihrig, Ataturk and the Nazi Imagination. The description for Ataturk and the Nazi Imagination says, early in his career, Adolf Hitler took inspiration from Benito Mussolini, his senior colleague in fascism. This fact is widely known, but an equally important role model for Hitler and the Nazis has been almost entirely neglected. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey. Stefan Ihrig's compelling presentation of this untold story promises to rewrite our understanding of the roots of Nazi ideology and strategy. Hitler was deeply interested in Turkish affairs after 1919. Hitler not only admired but also sought to imitate Ataturk's radical construction of a new nation from the ashes of defeat in World War I. Hitler and the Nazis watched closely as Ataturk defied the Western powers to seize government, and they modeled the Munich Putsch to a large degree on Ataturk's rebellion in Ankara. Hitler later remarked that in the political aftermath of the Great War, Ataturk was his master, he and Mussolini his students. This was no fading fascination. As the Nazis struggled through the 1920s, Ataturk remained Hitler's, quote, star in the darkness, end quote. Hitler's inspiration for remaking Germany along nationalist, secular, totalitarian, and ethnically exclusive lines. Nor did it escape Hitler's notice how ruthlessly Turkish governments had dealt with Armenian and Greek minorities, whom influential Nazis directly compared with German Jews. The new Turkey, or at least those aspects of it that the Nazis chose to see, became a model for Hitler's plans and dreams in the years leading up to the invasion of Poland. Back to the text, end footnote. In 1936, the Nazi newspaper Der Völkische Beobachter summarized the nationalist approach thus, quote, the opposition between the modern state model, which is coming ever closer to breaking through, and the immobile and timeless beliefs of Islam is irreconcilable and constantly intensifying. Nationalism, with nationalism's right to totality, must purposely seek to kill off certain political excrescences of religion and restrict it to its proper sphere. True to its leadership role, Kemalist Turkey has taken the first decisive trend-setting step in this regard. End quote. Footnote. Hauptarchiv 0104021 ZMO Pan-Islamismus in Völkischer Beobachter, 19th of April 1936. End footnote. A totalitarian nationalism that kills off religion. That would correspond to the program of the Nazi Party, NSDAP. The promotion of strict Islam evidently contradicts it, so why did the Nazis choose to engage in the latter? The crucial impulse was provided by the Zionist project in Palestine, and the religion-fueled Arab opposition to it. In light of the success of the Mufti's mobilization effort, Berlin began to reconsider its previous reticence towards Islam. Quote, precisely in the Palestinian case, end quote, wrote the Rhenish Westphalische Zeitung in 1937, quote, it has been repeatedly shown how militant Islamic nationalism has drawn its strength from the traditional intolerance of the Islamic religion in every disturbance that has engulfed Palestine Friday, the Islamic day of prayer has always been the crucial moment. End quote. Gisela Verzing, a leading Nazi publicist, has also been greatly impressed on an SS commissioned trip to Palestine, Egypt. Wikipedia says Gisela Verzing lived from 1907 to 1975 and was a right-wing German journalist, author, and foreign policy expert who was active during Nazi Germany and the Bonn Republic, or West Germany. Gisela Verzing was a member of the Nazi Party and contributed heavily to the creation and propagation of Nazi propaganda outside Germany. Back to the text. Gisela Verzing had noted, quote, a pronounced return to the religious traditions of Islam, end quote, and a, quote, fierce opposition to Western liberalism, ... The latest development in Egypt, ... show how strongly this theocracy can revive after the defeat of the initial liberal onslaught, end quote. Footnote, see Gisela Verzing, Engländer, Juden, Araber in Palästina, Leipzig, 1942. And footnote. The Islamic tactic now prevailed. The, quote, traditional intolerance, end quote, of nascent Islamism and the, quote, return to religious traditions, end quote, observed by Verzing were not only welcomed in Berlin, but also promoted, as we have seen from the Nazis' financial support of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic tenor of their Arabic language radio broadcasting. However, the incompatibility with the Turkish model remained. Radio Season's initial attempts to use Islamic messaging in its Turkish language programs aroused a storm of criticism in Ankara. Turkish media made fun of this attempt at deceit and recalled Kaiser Wilhelm II's futile efforts in World War I to instrumentalize Islam for secular ends. Religion should not be a means of political propaganda, the Turkish press insisted. Berlin was not swayed by the general point, but did decide to treat Turkey henceforth as a special case and ensure that the content of each broadcast was tailored to the specific audience. Thus, on the scripts for the broadcast of the 8th of January 1940, we find a variety of comments. Some scripts are marked, quote, for all, end quote. Some, quote, for all except Turkey, end quote. Some, quote, for Iran/Turkey, end quote. And others, quote, for Arabia, end quote. On the scripts for 25th of January, we also find racial sorting. An intellectually demanding script is marked, quote, India, Arabic, Turkey, end quote, while a banal anti-Jewish tirade carries the indication, quote, Arabic only. In the programming for the Arab world, Islam was central. Radio Season addressed this audience not as Arabs but as Muslims. Every news report would begin with the recitation of verses from the Quran. For this purpose, Berlin had obtained special permission from Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, which again is like one of the biggest Muslim universities in the world. I'm thinking of the right one, right? Oh no, I'm thinking of the Al-Azhar University, which is affiliated. Back to the text. A great deal of the available time was devoted to Islamic religious holidays, Feast of Sacrifice, Birthday of the Prophet, 1000th anniversary of the Al-Azhar Mosque. In addition, a regular weekly religious talk dealt with topics such as, quote, Islam, the religion of work, end quote, or the, quote, prohibition of pride and selfishness, end quote. At all times, the return of Muslims to their roots was advocated. For example, on the 18th of September 1942, at 1800, one of the secret stations, the Arab Nation, broadcast the following message, quote, democracy has nothing in common with Islam, which has no connection with any European principles, ... The Arabs and Muslims have their own traditions and customs. It is our duty to adhere to these traditions and not to follow European customs and principles which have nothing to do with Islam, end quote. After Amin al-Husseini arrived in Berlin in November 1941, the tone of the programs became more radical, especially as regards anti-Semitism. New section. Jew hatred by radio. The style and wording of the incitement broadcast by the Nazis to the Arab world are well documented. In the German Federal Archives in Berlin, there is an almost complete set of copies of the German language program scripts for the period from the 8th of January 1940 to the 31st of August 1941. In addition, due to the efforts of the American ambassador to Egypt, Charles Alexander C. Kirk, we also have access to the content of most of the subsequent broadcasts. Wikipedia says Alexander Comstock Kirk lived from 1888 to 1979 and was an American lawyer and diplomat. For the period between September 1941 and April 1942, Alexander C. Kirk sent regular detailed reports of the Nazis' Arabic language radio propaganda to his superiors in Washington. The process was refined for the period between April 1942 and April 1945, when excerpts from the season broadcast in Arabic were recorded in shorthand and translated word for word. Each week, Kirk sent a compilation of these records, 10 to 30 pages long, to the U.S. State Department, where the documents were stored. Historian Jeffrey Herf was the first to discover this trove in the USA's National Archives and present an analysis of it in his pioneering study, Nazi Propaganda for the Arab World. The description of this book, Nazi Propaganda for the Arab World, says, Jeffrey Herf, a leading scholar in the field, offers the most extensive examination to date of Nazi propaganda activities targeting Arabs and Muslims in the Middle East during World War II and the Holocaust. Herf draws extensively on previously unused and little-known archival resources, including the shocking transcriptions of the, quote, Axis broadcasts in Arabic, end quote, radio programs which convey a strongly anti-Semitic message. Herf explores the intellectual, political, and cultural context in which German and European radical anti-Semitism was found to resonate with similar views rooted in a selective appropriation of the traditions of Islam. Pro-Nazi Arab exiles in wartime Berlin, including Haj al-Husseini and Rashid al-Kilani, collaborated with the Nazis in constructing their Middle East propaganda campaigns. By integrating the political and military history of the war in the Middle East with the intellectual and cultural dimensions of the propagandistic diffusion of Nazi ideology, Herf offers the most thorough examination to date of this important chapter in the history of World War II. Importantly, he also shows how the anti-Semitism promoted by the Nazi propaganda effort contributed to anti-Semitism exhibited by adherents of radical forms of Islam in the Middle East today. Back to the text. For the Nazis, the, quote, final solution of the Jewish question, end quote, was not meant to be restricted to Europe. Quote, this war will end with an anti-Semitic world revolution and the destruction of the Jews throughout the world, end quote, states a Nazi party directive from May 1943. Quote, both are the prerequisites for perpetual peace, end quote. Footnote. See Jeffrey Herf, The Jewish Enemy, Nazi Propaganda During World War II and the Holocaust, published in 2006. The description for this book says, the sheer magnitude of the Holocaust has commanded our attention for the past 60 years. The extent of atrocities, however, has overshadowed the calculus Nazis used to justify their deeds. According to German wartime media, it was German citizens who were targeted for extinction by a vast international conspiracy. Leading the assault was an insidious, belligerent Jewish clique, so crafty and powerful that it managed to manipulate the actions of Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Hitler portrayed the Holocaust as a defensive act, a necessary move to destroy the Jews before they destroyed Germany. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda in Otto Dietrich's press office, translated this fanatical vision into a coherent cautionary narrative which the Nazi propaganda machine disseminated into the recesses of everyday life. Calling on impressive archival research, Jeffrey Herf recreates the wall posters that Germans saw while waiting for the streetcar, the radio speeches they heard at home or on the street, the headlines that blared from newsstands. The Jewish Enemy is the first extensive study of how anti-Semitism pervaded and shaped Nazi propaganda during World War II and the Holocaust, and how it pulled together the diverse elements of a delusionary Nazi worldview. Here we find an original and haunting exposition of the ways in which Hitler legitimized war and genocide to his own people, and is necessary to destroy an allegedly omnipotent Jewish foe. In an era when both anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories continue to influence world politics, Herf offers a timely reminder of their dangers along with a fresh reinterpretation of the paranoia underlying the ideology of the Third Reich. Back to the text and footnote. It was Hitler's declared will to expand the mass murder program known as the, quote, final solution, end quote, to the approximately 700,000 Jews of North Africa and the Middle East. This objective was part of the promise that he made to the Mufti at their meeting on the 28th of November 1941 in Berlin. When the German armies reached the southern exit from the Caucasus, Hitler told his interlocutor the German goal would be the, quote, annihilation of the Jews living under the protection of British power in the Arab region, end quote. What was involved here then is not just propaganda in service of further territorial expansion, nor was it only a matter of driving Zionism from Palestine. The goal of this radio-disseminated anti-Semitism was to prepare Muslim societies for the commission of all-out mass murder. And it almost happened, as Rommel's Panzer Army, Africa, embarked on its apparently unstoppable march towards Cairo in 1942. A special SS unit of 7 senior officers and 17 lower-ranking officers were sent to join it. This unit was entrusted with implementing the murder of Jews with the help, so it was believed, of a sufficient number of local Arabs. So how is this Jewish-Arab hatred, this Arab-Jew hatred whipped up? Wikipedia says the Panzer Army Africa was a joint German-Italian field army that fought in the North African campaign during World War II. The Panzer Army Africa consisted of 1 German corps and 3 Italian corps. It says on, but it probably should be in. In 1943, during the Tunisian campaign, the Panzer Army Africa was changed as to the Army Group Africa and was consisted, this is a terrible Wikipedia entry, of the newly formed German 5th Army and the Italian 1st Army. During the campaigns in North Africa, the Panzer Army Africa was subordinated to Italian command as well as to German command headquarters in the Mediterranean. Back to the text. An answer. So how was this Arab-Jew hatred whipped up? An answer is provided in one of Alexander C. Kirk's reports to Washington on German radio propaganda of April 1942. Quote, the following themes are repeated as nauseam. 1. The Jews. The Jews, backed by Britain and the USA, are the arch enemies of Islam. The Jews control American finance and have forced Roosevelt to pursue a policy of aggression. Roosevelt, quote, the warmonger, end quote, and Churchill, quote, the gravedigger of the British Empire, end quote, though criminal in themselves, are playthings in the hands of the Jewish fiends who are destroying civilization. End quote. Alexander C. Kirk. The above extract gives rise to an initial observation. To some extent, the traditional European anti-Semitic conspiracy ideology was retailed to Arabic audiences in original form. This also applies to the station's repeated claims that the Jews instigated both World Wars I and II, a claim that 45 years later would find its way into the Hamas Charter. Here is an excerpt from a Voice of the Free Arabs program broadcast at 2000 15 on the 3rd of November 1943. Quote, shall we not curse the time that has allowed this low race to realize their desires from such countries as Britain, America, and Russia? The Jews kindled this war in the interest of Zionism. The Jews are responsible for the blood that has been shed, ... The world will never be at peace until the Jewish race is exterminated. Otherwise, wars will always exist. The Jews are the germs which have caused all the trouble in the world, end quote. In addition, the full repertoire of racial anti-Semitism was translated into Arabic. Quote, the Jews are microbes. Like leeches, they cling to a country, sucking its blood, plundering, stealing, and carrying on their subversive activities, which they style commerce, end quote, stated Radio Season in August 1942. However, neither racial anti-Semitism nor conspiracy theories dominate the Nazis' radio program, as Jeffrey Herf notes, emphasizing, quote, the centrality, of the teachings of the Quran and of Islam in Nazism's Arabic programming. It was its reading of this work and this tradition, not citations from Mein Kampf or the protocols of the Elders of Zion, or speeches by Hitler or Goebbels, that served as the most important entry point to Arab and Muslim listeners, end quote. Jeffrey Herf. And in fact, from 1939 to 1945, the Islamic Antisemitism that in 1937 could only be disseminated in written form was brought to the masses over the radio waves. Quote, Berlin made explicit use of religious rhetoric, terminology, and imagery, and sought to engage with and reinterpret religious doctrine and concepts to manipulate Muslims for political and military purposes, ... German propaganda combined Islam with anti-Jewish agitation to an extent that had not hitherto been known in the modern Muslim world, end quote. Writes David Motadel. Thus, on the 23rd of December 1942, the Arab nation broadcast a speech given by Amin al-Husseini on the 18th of December on the occasion of the opening of the Islamic Central Institute in Berlin. The similarity to the content of Islam and Judaism, the pamphlet, is striking. Every Muslim knows that Jewish animosity towards the Arabs dates back to the dawn of Islam. Every Muslim knows how they opposed and hurt the Prophet, as well as creating endless difficulties for the Prophet. ... So the Quran says, quote, you shall find that the most hostile people to the faithful are the Jews, end quote. After this reference, end quote, Haj Amin al-Husseini. After this reference back to the 7th century, we get the link to the present. Quote, the Jews are the same whether during the era of the Prophet or in succeeding eras. The Jews never waver from their policy of intrigue and evil doing. They spread their venom in the Islamic countries for their ambitions, and of late these ambitions have been clear in Palestine, the Holy Land, which they want to make a center for the extension of their domination. ... The Quran says that they heat the cauldron of war and bring corruption on earth, and God does not like those who corrupt. Such are the Jews' ways. Even in this war, the Jews have brought about the clash between different opinions, and, as bracket Hayam and bracket Weitzman, who was like the leading Zionist at this time, said, this war is a Jewish war, and in a point of fact, world Jewry dictates the war, as was the case during the days of Muhammad. The Jews have spread their influence over Britain. The Jews dominate America. The Jews are behind destructive and atheist communism. The Jews have brought people against each other, and the catastrophes and tragedies which are happening now are caused by the Jews, end quote. Haj Amin al-Husseini. Again and again, the program makes program makers of the Orient Zone repeated only those verses from the Quran that are suitable for presenting Jews as, quote, enemies of Islam, end quote. Day after day, the age of Muhammad was combined with the 20th century, and the alleged irreconcilability of the two religions stressed. Thus, on the 28th of January 1944, Berlin in Arabic stated, quote, that this enmity and this struggle between Arabs and Jews will always continue until one side or the other is destroyed. The struggle and war between Arabs and Jews relates to religious beliefs, and such conflicts can end only through the destruction of one side, ... Between Arabs and Jews, enmity has always prevailed from the olden times, but since the appearance of Islam it has become sharper, end quote. Footnote, see the article by Jeffrey Herf, Hitler's Jihad, Nationalsozialistische Rundfunkpropaganda für Nordafrika und den Nahen Osten. Unquote. Articles from 2010. Seven years later, Said Qutb's pamphlet Our Struggle with the Jews would seamlessly pick up the threads of this propaganda. As Jeffrey Hertz writes, Qutb's tirade, quote, displays a striking continuity of the themes of Nazism's wartime broadcast, end quote. New section, Call to Pogrom. The season broadcast did not only propagate anti-Semitic words, they also encouraged anti-Semitic deeds. The incitement to action was further stepped up when Rommel advanced on Egypt in summer 1942. After having captured the Libyan port of Tobruk near the Egyptian border in 1942, in early July, the German-Italian army launched an attack on the British position near Al Alamein, 100 kilometers from Alexandria. Cairo suddenly seemed within reach. While Mussolini flew to Libya so as not to miss the opportunity to enter Cairo at the head of the troops on a white horse, in the first weeks of July, an unbroken line of trains left Cairo for Palestine to enable Jews, free of charge and with no passport controls, to flee Egypt in time. Then the British Eighth Army succeeded in halting Rommel's advance. In these decisive weeks, season's propaganda shed all restraint. The victory of the Axis powers was at hand, suggested the voice of the Free Arabs at 2115 on the 25th of June 1942. Quote, everywhere people are asking what part they can play in wiping out the British and the Jews, end quote. The broadcasters had an idea, quote, all over the country the Jews should be watched. Every Jew's name must be written down, together with his address and his business. The Jews must be watched carefully so that they be wiped out at the earliest opportunity. 12 days later, the station stepped up the rhetoric, demanding that, quote, the Egyptians rise as one man to kill the Jews before they have a chance of betraying the Egyptian people, end quote. This appeal followed, quote, Arabs of Syria, Iraq, and Palestine, what are you waiting for? The Jews are planning to violate your women, to kill your children, and to destroy you. According to the Muslim religion, the defense of your life is a duty which can only be fulfilled by annihilating the Jews. This is your best opportunity to get rid of this dirty race, which has usurped your rights and brought misfortune and destruction on your countries. Kill the Jews, burn their property, destroy their stores, annihilate these base supporters of British imperialism. Your sole hope of salvation lies in annihilating the Jews before the Jews annihilate you, end quote. This was not the only effort to incite pogroms. After the landing by 63,000 U.S. and British soldiers in Algeria and Morocco in 1942, the Nazis aimed to provoke clashes between Moroccans and Americans. A point of entry is, quote, provided by the Jewish element, end quote, reads the introduction to a set of, and this is a title, Guidelines for Underground Propaganda in Morocco. Personally endorsed by the Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, the indigenous inhabitants should be, quote, encouraged to engage in acts of anti-Jewish violence. Since the Americans will then be compelled to take action to protect the Jews, the desired American clash with the locals will be brought about, end quote. Recommended were the, quote, fomenting of demonstrations, clashes and pogroms against Jews, calls for the looting of Jewish businesses, refusal to pay taxes and loan repayments, end quote. This incitement should, quote, be disseminated by the new secret radio station, end quote. Did this calculation pay off? New section. Farhud, the massacre of Iraqi Jews. Wikipedia says the Farhud was a pogrom carried out against the Jewish population of Baghdad on the 1st to 2nd of June 1941, coinciding with the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, immediately following the British victory in the Anglo-Iraqi War. The riots occurred in a power vacuum that followed the collapse of the pro-fascist, pro-Nazi government of Rashid Ali al-Gaylani, while the city was in a state of instability. The violence came immediately after the rapid defeat of Rashid Ali by British forces, whose earlier coup had generated a short period of national euphoria, and was fueled by allegations that Iraqi Jews had aided the British. More than 180 Jews were killed, 1,000 injured, although some non-Jewish rioters were also killed in the attempt to quell the violence. Looting of Jewish property took place and 900 Jewish homes were destroyed. On account of the role of Axis and pro-Axis elements in inciting and eventually carrying out the pogrom, it is often argued to have constituted the extension of the Shoah in Iraq, though this classification and even its inclusion as part of the wider Holocaust have been disputed. In any case, as with other persecutions of Jews outside of Europe, it is often overlooked when compared to the Holocaust in Europe, especially outside Israel, where the vast majority of Iraqi Jews, as well as their descendants, currently live. The event spurred a migration of Iraqi Jews out of Iraq, although a direct connection to the 1951-52 exodus from Iraq is disputed. As many Jews who left Iraq immediately following the Farhud later returned to the country, and permanent Jewish emigration out of Iraq did not accelerate significantly until 1950-51. One second. It's summertime and it rains. And we don't have air conditioning, so the windows must remain open. At the same time, by God, I don't want my room to get soaked. By God. Okay. Sorry about that. Ah! Almost fell. Okay, a lot of wind's coming in through that one, so that's not good. Gotta close that window. Okay. Back to the text. Ooh, it's thundering. So here we go. New section, Farhud, the massacre of Iraqi Jews. On the whole, the radio program had little immediate impact on Muslim behavior. The uprisings called for by the Mufti in British and American-occupied territories failed to materialize. Most of the Arab leaders collaborated with Britain, and desertion by Muslims fighting in the Allied ranks were rare. No definitive answer can be given to the question of whether Muslims in, for example, Palestine would have participated in massacres of Jewish civilians as the Nazis hoped. The turning of the tide of war in 1942 ensured that the matter was never put to the test. The same could be said for western North Africa. Following the landing by German troops in Tunis in November 1942, Jews were looted, terrorized, and abused as forced laborers, but not murdered. In Tunisia, as in Morocco and Algeria, Germany had to pay heed to its French, Italian, and Spanish allies who placed obstacles in the way of the murder of Jews. In individual cases, Jews were protected by Muslim leaders. Thus, the Moroccan Sultan, Muhammad V, was outraged by the racialist nature of the anti-Jewish laws issued by Vichy France. Footnote: Muhammad V of Morocco who lived from 1909 to 1961, was the Sultan of Morocco from 1927 to 1953, and from 1955 to 1957, and first King of Morocco from 1957 to 1961. A member of the Alawi dynasty, he played an instrumental role in securing the independence of Morocco from the French and Spanish protectorates. Muhammad was enthroned as Sultan upon the death of his father, Yusuf bin Hassan, in 1927. Early in his reign, his approval of the Berber Dahir drew widespread backlash and spurred an upsurge of Moroccan nationalism in opposition to continued French rule. Initially more amenable to colonial authorities, Muhammad grew increasingly supportive of the nationalist movement later on. During World War II, he supported the Allies, participating in the 1943 Anfaq Conference, and took steps to protect Moroccan Jews from Vichy persecution. Muhammad became a central figure of the independence cause after the war. In 1947, he delivered a historic speech in Tangier, in which he made an open appeal for Moroccan independence and emphasized the country's ties with the rest of the Arab world. Muhammad V's relationship with the French became increasingly strained afterwards as colonial rule grew more repressive. In 1953, French authorities deposed Muhammad, exiled him to Corsica, later transferring him to Madagascar, and installed his first cousin, once removed, Muhammad ben Arafa, as Sultan. The deposition sparked active opposition to the French protectorate, and 2 years later faced rising violence in Morocco. The French government allowed Muhammad's return. In 1956, he successfully negotiated with France and Spain for Moroccan independence, and in the following year he assumed the title of king. Muhammad died in 1961 at the age of 51 and was succeeded by his eldest son, who took the throne as Hassan II. Back to the text. Muhammad V of Morocco was guided by Islamic law, which deemed a Jew who had converted to Islam equal in status. Footnote: Robert Satloff, Among the Righteous, Lost Story from the Holocaust Long Reach into Arab Lands. Published in 2006. And the description of this book says, thousands of people have been honored for saving Jews during the Holocaust, but not a single Arab. Looking for a hopeful response to the plague of Holocaust denial sweeping across the Arab and Muslim worlds, Robert Satloff sets off on a quest to find the Arab hero, whose story will change the way Arabs view Jews themselves and their own history. The story of the Holocaust's long reach in the Arab world is difficult to uncover, covered up by desert sands and desert politics. We followed Satloff over 4 years through 11 countries, from the barren wastelands of the Sahara, where thousands of Jews were imprisoned in labor camps, through the archways of the mosque in Paris, which may once have hidden 1,700 Jews, to the living rooms of octogenarians in London, Paris, and Tunis. The story is very cinematic. The characters are rich and handsome, brave and cowardly. There are heroes and villains. The most surprising story of all is why, more than 60 years after the end of the war, so few Arabs and Jews want this story told. Back to the text and footnote. Moreover, Allied forces had already landed in Morocco and Algeria, so that unlike in Eastern Europe, any mass murder of Jews would have swiftly come to light. Nonetheless, one anti-Jewish pogrom by thousands of Muslims did take place. The Farhud, as this massacre has since been known, occurred on the 1st and 2nd of June 1941 in Baghdad and went on for 30 hours. Jews, members of a community that had lived in Iraq since time immemorial, were mutilated and murdered, children were killed and women raped in front of their husbands, synagogues set on fire and Torah scrolls destroyed. The corpses of 180 Jewish women and men could be identified, but according to a BBC report, a further 600 victims were alleged to have been buried in mass graves. Prior to this mass murder, Fritz Grobe, since 1932 the German envoy in Iraq, and Amin al-Husseini, active in Baghdad since 1939, had been campaigning in support of the Nazis. Their efforts had culminated on the 1st of April 1941 in a coup by a pro-Axis Iraqi politician, Rashid Ali al-Gailani. Rashid Ali al-Gailani lived from 1892 to 1965 and was an Iraqi politician who served as Prime Minister of Iraq on 3 occasions, from March to November 1933, from March 1940 to April 1941, and from April to May 1941. Rashid Ali al-Gailani is chiefly remembered as an ardent Arab nationalist who attempted to remove British influence from Iraq by starting a coup against the government in 1941. During his brief tenures as Prime Minister in 1940 and 1941, Rashid Ali al-Gailani attempted to negotiate settlements with the Axis powers and USSR during World War II to counter British influence in Iraq. Back to the text. For London, a red line had been crossed. On the 2nd of May, the Anglo-Iraqi War began. Hitler, preoccupied with the imminent invasion of the Soviet Union, gave the Iraqi putschists only half-hearted support. By May 28th, British forces were at the gates of Baghdad. On the 31st of May, al-Husseini and the putschists fled to Iran. By then, the decision to perpetrate a massacre had probably been taken. Jewish dwellings had been marked in advance. And the introduction to the Wikipedia on the Anglo-Iraqi War says, the Anglo-Iraqi War was a British-led Allied military campaign during the Second World War against the Kingdom of Iraq, then ruled by Rashid Ali al-Gailani, who had seized power in the 1941 Iraqi coup d'etat with assistance from Germany and Italy. The campaign resulted in the downfall of Gaylani's government and reoccupation of Iraq by the British and the return to power of the regent of Iraq, Prince Abdallah, a British ally. Mandatory Iraq had been governed by the British since 1921. Prior to Iraq's nominal independence in 1932, Britain concluded the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of 1930, which was opposed by Iraqi nationalists, including Rashid Ali al-Gaylani. Although Iraq was considered a neutral power under Regent Abd Allah, it had a pro-British government. In April 1941, Iraqi nationalists organized the Golden Square coup with assistance from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The coup ousted Abd Allah and installed al-Gaylani as prime minister. He officially established cordial relations with the Axis powers, prompting the Allies to respond. For the Allies, Iraq represented an important land bridge between British forces in Egypt and India. Following a series of skirmishes, Allied airstrikes were launched against Iraq on the 2nd of May. The campaign resulted in the collapse of al-Gaylani's short-lived government and reinstalled Abd Allah as the regent. This increased the influence of the Allies in the Middle Eastern theater. And Wikipedia says the 1941 Iraqi coup d'etat, also called the Rashid Ali al-Gaylani coup or the Golden Square coup, was a nationalist coup d'etat in Iraq on the 1st of April 1941 that overthrew the pro-British regime of Regent Abd Allah and his Prime Minister Nouri al-Said and installed Rashid Ali al-Gaylani as Prime Minister. The coup, the 1941 Iraqi coup d'etat, or the Golden Square coup, was led by 4 Iraqi nationalist army generals known as the Golden Square, who intended to use the war to press for full Iraqi independence following the limited independence granted in 1932. To that end, they worked with German intelligence and accepted military assistance from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The change in government led to the British invasion of Iraq and subsequent occupation until 1947. Back to the text. By 20th of May, British forces were at the gates of Baghdad. On the 31st of May, al-Husseini and the putschists fled to Iran. By then, the decision to perpetrate a massacre had probably already been taken. Jewish dwellings had been marked in advance. A subsequent official inquiry by the Iraqi government identified 2 causes of the massacre: the Mufti's agitation and the Nazi German radio propaganda. What was the content of this propaganda immediately before the massacre? The Anglo-Iraqi conflict, quote, opens, a fertile field for our Arabic broadcasting, end quote, asserted Joseph Goebbels on the 3rd of May 1941. Quote, we must try to use Arab instincts, solely for our aims, end quote. Joseph Goebbels. In this period, the Mufti, now resident in Baghdad, was in constant contact with the Berlin-based Orient Zone team. On the 5th of May 1941, Radio Season reported on an appeal by the Mufti, quote, for arms to be taken up against England, end quote. It featured Iraqi spiritual leaders according to whom, quote, no Muhammadan will any longer fight on the side of Britain without thereby sinning against the interest of Islam, end quote. On the 11th of May, the Nazi radio station once again quoted Amin al-Husseini, quote, the Iraqi struggle is a struggle for all Mohammedans and thus a holy war for Islam, end quote. Footnote, program script for 11th of May 1941. In the script for Turkey, there is no mention of holy war. The relevant text reads, quote, the Iraqi struggle is a struggle for all Muslims who today await the moment of liberation from English yoke, end quote. End footnote. The Mufti designated Baghdad's 80,000-strong Jewish community as the scapegoat for al-Gaylani's looming defeat. The Mufti, Husseini, accused the Jews of passing information to the British, thus paving the way for the British's victory. In the memoirs the Mufti wrote several decades later, the Mufti continued to attribute the coup's failure to the Jews. On the 26th of May, a few days before the massacre, Yunis Bari graced radio season with one of Yunis Bari's notorious tirades. Taking up al-Husseini's conspiracy theory, Yunis Bari linked it to Islam. Quote, "The Arabs fought the Jews and expelled the Jews from the Arabian Peninsula 1,400 years ago. Muhammad was the first to expel them, ... The Arabs of Iraq bear witness now to the actions taken by Jews, ... in accordance with British orders, bracketly, so allegedly as traitors, Matthias Küntzel, and bracket, ... The Jews everywhere are an abomination. Remember the words of the Quran. The greatest enemies of mankind are those who believe as the Jews." End quote. Yunis Bari. Despite the fact that not a word of it is true, the talk appears to have been emotionally effective. While this was not in itself enough to effect a massacre, in combination with the prior efforts of Groba and the Mufti and the bitterness of the Iraqi defeat in this short war, is likely to have contributed to the fact that deeds followed words and hundreds of Jews were murdered. New section. What was the impact of the radio propaganda? Many contemporary sources emphasize the German broadcast's attractiveness and popularity. This remained true in Iraq even after the defeat of the pro-Nazi coup and the Farhud. In September 1941, a British informant reported that, quote, "Those living in towns turned their radios on to Germany and encouraged others to listen in defiance of instructions to the contrary." End quote. Footnote. See Eli Kaduri, Arabic Political Memoirs and Other Studies. The description for this says, this book constitutes the continuation and complement of a work, the Chatham House version and other Middle Eastern studies, published in 1970. Both works are concerned with certain themes prominent in recent Middle Eastern history, namely the influence of great power and particularly British policies in the region, the character of Middle Eastern and particularly Arab politics and political thought during the last 100 years or so, and the fate of so-called minorities, and particularly the Jews of the Arab world, caught as they were in the crossfire of antagonistic ideologies and of international conflicts. Back to the text. The Arabs in Palestine too listened to the Nazi radio, quote, most attentively, particularly in town and village coffee shops, where large crowds gather for the purpose. Whilst the distorted information does not have any great effect on the intelligentsia, the uneducated classes are undoubtedly being influenced, end quote. Reported Palestine's Criminal Investigation Department on the 15th of September 1939. This finding is corroborated by an internal report of the Jewish agency that cites an Arab informant who, on the 7th of October 1939, observed a crowd in an Arab coffee house in Jaffa. Quote, 10 days after the war broke out, the police in Nablus imposed a ban on listening to Arabic language broadcasts from Berlin, (the ban was conveyed verbally to those in the coffee houses). I was told that there is a similar ban in place in Jaffa. But in reality, even in the coffee houses, this station is turned on. One of the informants told me that on the eve of the Sabbath, the 7th of October, he went into a cafe and heard a German broadcast. Arabs were standing around the cafe, even on the surrounding balconies, to listen to the program. That's cited as a citation from, it's a quote from the book. It's a quote of a book that's quoted. Which translates as between the Axis and the mandatory power, Palestine and National Socialism. Looking for the description of this book. Not really seeing any. Back to the text and footnote. The British took a whole range of measures to counter this propaganda, including using jamming equipment to hinder reception. In 1941, the British launched an Arabic-language radio station, Sharq al-Adna, in Jaffa. They tried to ban listening not only in public places but also in private dwellings. Footnote: see Meir Zamir, The Secret Anglo-French War in the Middle East, Intelligence and Decolonization, published in 2015. The description for this book says, the role of intelligence in colonialism and decolonization is a rapidly expanding field of study. The premise of the secret Anglo-French War in the Middle East is that intelligence statecraft is the, quote, missing dimension, end quote, in the established historiography of the Middle East during and after World War II, arguing that intelligence, especially covert political action and clandestine diplomacy, played a key role in Britain's Middle East policy. This book examines new archival sources in order to demonstrate that despite World War II and the Cold War, the traditional rivalry between Britain and France in the Middle East continued unabated, assuming the form of a little-known secret war. This shadow war strongly influenced decolonization of the region as each power sought to undermine the other. Britain exploited France's defeat to evict France from its mandated territories in Syria and Lebanon, and incorporated them in its own sphere of influence, whilst France's successful use of intelligence enabled France to undermine Britain's position in Palestine, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, shedding new light on the clandestine Franco-Zionist collaboration against Britain in the Middle East, and the role of the British Secret Services in the 1948 Arab-Jewish War in Palestine. This book, which presents close to 400 secret Syrian and British documents obtained by the French intelligence, is essential reading for scholars with an interest in the political history of the region, inter-Arab and international relations, and intelligence studies. Back to the text. In December 1942, SS Standartenführer Walter Schellenberg complained in a report on the situation in Palestine that, quote, the radio equipment in the possession of Arabs has to a large extent been confiscated or rendered useless, end quote. Walter Schellenberg, SS Standartenführer. Footnote: according to an American estimate in 1941, there were 90,000 shortwave radios in the region, of which 55,000 were in Egypt and 24,000 in Palestine. And footnote. Last but not least, the BBC in Arabic began to increase the number of citations from the Quran, celebrated Islamic festivals, and present Britain as the real friend of Islam. Wikipedia says Walter Schellenberg, who lived from 1910 to 1952, was a German SS functionary during the Nazi era. Walter Schellenberg rose to the ranks of the SS, becoming one of the highest-ranking men in the Sicherheitsdienst (SD), and eventually assumed the position as head of foreign intelligence for Nazi Germany following the abolition of the Abwehr in 1944. Back to the text. Just as the Berlin broadcasters put up Amin al-Husseini as their frontman, the BBC now promoted such opponents of the Mufti as Amir Abdullah of Transjordan and the pro-British leader of the North African Senussi Brotherhood. I'm looking up Senussi Brotherhood. The Senussi, or Sanusi, are a Muslim political religious Sufi order and clan in Libya and surrounding regions founded in Mecca in 1837 by the Grand Senussi, the Algerian Muhammad ibn Ali al-Senussi. During World War I, the Senussis fought against both Italy and Britain. During World War II, the Senussis provided support to the British 8th Army in North Africa against Nazi and fascist Italian forces. The Grand Senussi's grandson became King Idris I of Libya in 1951. The 1969 Libyan revolution, led by Muammar Gaddafi, overthrew King Idris I of Libya, ending the Libyan monarchy. The movement remained active despite sustained persecution by Gaddafi's government. The Senussi spirit and legacy continue to be prominent in today's Libya, most notably in Kairanesa. Back to the text. Quote, in the recent period, the English radio propaganda ... has become especially good and effective, end quote, commented Walter Schellenberg in a message to the German Foreign Office of December 1942. To Radio Season's most important specialty, Radio Season's anti-Semitism, however, the Allies provided no counter. The anti-Semitic anti-Zionism disseminated day in, day out by the German radio was popular throughout the Arab world. Far more indeed than was Nazi Germany itself. The Orient Zone skillfully exploited every opportunity to underline the alleged identity of interest of Zionists and allies. On this front, the BBC and other Allied stations had nothing to say. None of them wanted to be seen as defenders or even, quote, accomplices, end quote, of the Jews. They feared that if they drew attention to the topic of anti-Semitism, they would end up confirming the Nazi propaganda, to the effect that the Allies were the instruments of the Jews. The more popular the Nazis became in the Middle East, the less ready were the Allies to oppose their use of anti-Semitism there. Ann Fuller, an employee of the United States Office of War Information, addressed this dilemma in a report of September 1941. Quote, "The Zionist problem," end quote, Ann Fuller concluded, presented, quote, "the most difficulties in bracket Allied and bracket broadcasting to the Arab world," end quote. Ann Fuller. The BBC, meanwhile, avoided the theme entirely. It thereby left, quote, "the Axis powers with an important weapon with which to stir up discontent within the Arab world," end quote. Ann Fuller advised that the USA should follow the BBC's policy and, quote, "make no mention of the thorny subject." Admittedly, this is far from satisfactory, but until the precarious future of the Near and Middle East is better defined, there seems no other course. End quote. Ann Fuller. This position was the one implemented. Wary of the Arab mood, the Allies decided de facto to dissociate themselves from Zionism while ignoring rather than opposing the German broadcasters' anti-Semitism. If the Nazis' radio propaganda succeeded in doing anything, it was in disseminating and escalating Jew hatred in this part of the world. The reverse conclusion is that in Muslim-populated centers that were beyond the reach of the seasoned hate propaganda, there was less hatred of Jews. This was, for example, the case in Bosnia-Herzegovina, home to some 950,000 Muslims and 14,000 Jews. Here the Nazis only had written material at their disposal to stir up the Muslims against the Jews. The material included the widely distributed Islam and Judaism. There was, however, no radio propaganda in Serbo-Croat. In this region, anti-Semitism failed to gain a foothold. The Middle Eastern conflict attracted little attention, and there were no attacks by Muslims on Jews in the post-war period. Footnote. See the article by Boris Havel, Haj Amin al-Husseini, Herald of Religious Anti-Judaism in the Contemporary Islamic World, published in the Journal of Middle East and Africa in 2014. End footnote. Even at the beginning of 1944, when it was very hard to believe that the Nazis could still win the war, Radio Season continued to attract a large audience. This is in any case the view of two employees of the U.S. Military Intelligence Division. Even though only a small percentage of Arabs owned a radio, yet from, quote, reliable sources in both Syria and Lebanese capitals, end quote, they had learned that, quote, practically all Arabs who have radios and listen to any variety of programs listen to Berlin, end quote. The Arabs, they continued, do not, quote, take German, quote, news, end quote, at all seriously, end quote, and the effect of German news reporting was, quote, practically nil, end quote. Rather, Berlin radio broadcasts achieved their impact through the, quote, clever and full exploitation of half-truths and occasional events, end quote. Berlin broadcasts seized on the, quote, curiosity and the credulity, the avarice, the aspirations, the religious instincts, or the racial prejudice, etc. of the Arabs, end quote, to fan their antagonism to the Jews and the Allies. Only by the end of 1944, when there had for a long time been no German military victories to report, did the numbers of listeners and impact of the propaganda markedly decline. As Seth Arsanian, a close observer of the radio scene during World War II, wrote correctly in 1948, the effect of the propaganda, the resulting changes in attitude cannot really be measured. Seth Arsanian's prognosis seems nevertheless to have been confirmed. Quote, "It may be surmised that the campaign of hate, the name-calling, the derision, and the accusations which Axis propagandists directed against the Allied nations will continue to have their subtle effect for some time to come. This devaluation of the European nations in the minds of the Arab masses will not be limited to any specific nation, but will extend to Western civilization in general, tending to strengthen traditionalist conservative groups in the Middle East." End quote. Seth Arsenian. Wartime Propaganda in the Middle East Journal, October 1948, Volume 2. And footnote. An example is Iran. Here, Germany's Farsi-language wartime broadcast enjoyed great popularity. When the 36-year-old cleric Ruhollah Mousavi, later to become famous under the name Ruhollah Khomeini, returned in winter 1938 from Iraq to Qum, Qum in Iran, writes his biographer Amir Taheri, quote, "He had brought with him a radio set made by the British company Pi, which Khomeini had bought from an Indian Muslim pilgrim. The radio proved a good buy, ... It also gave Khomeini a certain prestige. Many mullahs and talebas would gather at Khomeini's home, often on the terrace, in the evenings to listen to Radio Berlin and the BBC." End quote. Amir Taheri. Wikipedia said, Amir Taheri, born 1942, is an Iran-born journalist, author, intellectual, scholar of Middle Eastern politics, activist based in Europe. Amir Taheri's writings focus on the Middle East affairs and topics related to Islamic terrorism. Amir Taheri is the current chairman of the Gatestone Institute in Europe. Not a good sign here. Gatestone Institute is an American far-right think tank known for publishing anti-Muslim articles. It was founded in 2012 by Nina Rosenwald, who serves as its president. John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and former national security advisor, was its chairman from 2013 until March 2018. Its current chairman is Amir Taheri. The organization has attracted attention for publishing false or inaccurate articles, some of which were shared widely. Yeah, it seems like there's a decent amount of criticism of Amir Taheri's scholarship. Anyway, back to the text. Footnote. See Amir Taheri's The Spirit of Allah, published in 1986. On the 30th of April 2014, Taheri informed me of the source of this information is based on several interviews with people who had known Khomeini in the 1940s, among them Ayatollah Shubair Sanjani, Hojat al-Islam Ali Davani, and Saeed Hussein Adbi. The description of this book says, the former editor of Iran's largest selling daily newspaper analyzes the personality of the Ayatollah Khomeini and examines the meaning of the Islamic Revolution for Iran and the world at large. Back to the text and footnote. Even though Khomeini remained opposed to Hitler and National Socialism, it is reasonable to assume there's a link between the eruption of his Jew hatred in 1963 and the invective from Berlin that he had imbibed over the radio 15 years previously. New section, Excursus, the Nazis in Iran. A photo taken in 1940 in Tehran shows a big crowd listening carefully to a large pipe radio placed in an elevated niche on a wall. Quote, in some newspapers and private notes of the time, we find reports of how in the late 1930s, during the broadcast of the Farsi language news from Berlin, people would gather together on the steps of the tea houses with a radio set in order to listen to the Germans' reports of their territorial gains on the various fronts. End quote. Writes Iranian writer Amir Hassan Sheh Helton. Wikipedia says Amir Hassan Sheh Helton, born 1956, is an Iranian writer. He has published 12 novels, 6 volumes of short stories, and a screenplay, of which are banned in Iran. Many are translated in English, German, Italian, Norwegian, Lithuanian, Arabic, and Hebrew. Back to the text. Footnote. No footnote. Already in World War I, most Iranians had supported the Germans, who were fighting their common enemies, the British and the Russians. Moreover, the Germans also enjoyed great prestige as technicians and engineers. Since the mid-1920s, Germany had not only laid the foundations of an Iranian industrial infrastructure, but also exported, quote, made in Germany, and, quote, technical education to Iran. Soon enough, the, quote, German work ethic, end quote, had become the stuff of legend. In addition, after 1933, the German-Iranian friendship had also taken on a racist dimension through a purported shared membership in the, quote, Aryan race. All this created a bond between Germans and Iranians of a quite different quality to their respective relations with the Arab world. One second, I'm going to look something up. Okay. Never mind. Back to the text. Already in World War I, most Iranians had supported the Germans. Sorry, I already said that. With the start of World War II, cooperation became especially close. In 1940, 47% of all Iranian exports went to Nazi Germany, while Germany's share of Iranian imports reached 43%. In the same period between 1939 and 1945, a special German European anti-Semitism was marketed in Iran, albeit in an Islamic guise. A 14-page report by Alexander Winkler, the former cultural attaché of the German embassy in Tehran, titled Lessons of German Propaganda Work in Iran between November 1939 and September 1941, dated 10th of January 1942, is highly revealing. One did not get far with conventional anti-Semitism in Iran. Quote, the broad masses of Iranians lack a feeling of race theory, end quote. Instead, religion was the appropriate vehicle. Quote, the propaganda that promises the greatest success, end quote, writes Winkler. Quote, ties in with Iranian religious ideas and expectations, end quote. In this respect, Winkler mentions the belief in the Shiite Messiah, the 12th Imam, and the readiness of Iranians to view Hitler as this very Messiah. Quote, in the inclination of the Iranians towards religious fanaticism, powerful forces lie ready that we can exploit for our own ends, end quote. Alexander Winkler. But how could Nazi Germany, of all places, conduct religious propaganda? Winkler had the answer. Quote, the immediate point of connection with Shiite belief lies in the treatment of the Jewish question, which the Mohammedan perceives in religious terms, so bringing him closer to National Socialism on a religious basis. End quote. Alexander Winkler. Hatred of Jews is to provide the way into the Shiite belief system, while at the same time that belief system is seen as the natural medium for the propagation of National Socialism. German ambassador to Iran, Irvin Ettel, gave this idea concrete form when he connected the 7th with the 20th century. Quote, one way to promote this, bracket, anti-Jewish, Matthias Küntzel, end bracket, development, would be to highlight Muhammad's struggle with the Jews in the olden days and that of the Führer in the present day, end quote. Alexander Winkler recommended to the Irvin Ettel recommended to the Foreign Office at the beginning of 1941. According to German Wikipedia, Irvin Vettel was a German diplomat, National Socialist SS leader, and editor. Back to the text. Irvin Ettel also provided the relevant citations. On the one hand, Verse 585, the Quran reads, quote, "Truly you will find that among all people the Jews, are the most hateful toward the faithful," end quote. And on the other, the final sentence of the second chapter of Hitler's Mein Kampf, quote, "In resisting the Jews, I am doing the Lord's work," end quote. If he succeeds, writes Ettel, quote, "in bringing the country's spirituality to a large extent under the influence of German propaganda, the mass of the people in its full breadth can be captured," end quote. It was, however, not only the pseudo-religious approach of the propaganda that accounted for the seasoned broadcast popularity, but also the style of the programming. In 1940, Reader Bullard, the British ambassador to Iran, complained that, quote, "even if we, bracket the British, in bracket, do broadcast in Persian, we cannot hope to rival the Germans in interest, as their more violent, abusive style with exaggerated claims appeals to the Persian public," end quote. Reader Bullard, Letters from Tehran. The description for this book says, Reader Bullard's letters reflect the politics and society of Iran at a turning point in its history. They should be a useful source for the historians of the period, as well as affording some interest in their own right. Back to the text and footnote. In addition, the season had in Bahram Sharok, an outstanding speaker with a good voice and excellent diction. Shakrok's anti-Semitic incitement had at times a direct impact on the situation of Iran's Jews. An Iranian Jewish woman, Parvin R., who was 17 years old at the time, remembers, quote, "in particular a speech by Bahram Sharok on Radio Berlin on the occasion of the Jewish Purim festival. Sharok urged the audience to exact revenge for the alleged massacre of Persians by Jews in the Purim story. Parvin, quote, "the next day, some of my father's Muslim friends came to my father's pharmacy to demand an explanation. I was there that day and I heard them belittle and mock the Jews. When my father tried to explain the issue, they attacked him and grabbed his neck, whereupon my father told me to run home. I never asked, did I ever find out how he got rid of them," end quote. Purim is a Jewish holiday that commemorates the saving of the Jewish people from annihilation at the hands of an official of the Achaemenid Empire named Haman, as it is recounted in the Book of Esther, usually dated to the late 5th or 4th centuries BCE. Haman was the royal vizier to the Persian king Ahasuerus. Xerxes the Fourth, or Artaxerxes the First, Ksharsha, and Artaxerxes in Old Persian, respectively. Haman's plans were foiled by Mordecai of the tribe of Benjamin, who previously warned the king about an assassination attempt, and Esther, Mordecai's cousin and adopted daughter, who had become queen of Persia after her marriage to Ahasuerus. The day of deliverance became a day of feasting and rejoicing among Jews. According to the scroll of Esther, quote, they should make them days of feasting and gladness, and of sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor, end quote. Purim is celebrated among Jews by exchanging gifts of food and drink, known as mishloch manot, donating charity to the poor, known as matanat la evionim, eating a celebratory meal with alcoholic beverages, known as Seudat Purim or Mishteh, public recitation of the scroll of Esther, or, quote, reading the Megillah, end quote, usually in synagogue, reciting additions to the daily prayers and graces and the grace after meals, known as Al Hadnasim, applying henna, parenthesis, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, end parenthesis. Other customs include wearing masks and costumes, public celebrations and parades, abd loyada, eating hamantashen, or Haman's pockets, and drinking wine. According to the Hebrew calendar, Purim is celebrated annually on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Adar, and is celebrated in Adar 2 in Hebrew leap years, which occurs 7 times in every 19 years. The day following the victory of the Jews over their enemies, the 13th of Adar, a date now observed in most years with the fast of Esther. In cities that were protected by a surrounding wall at the time of Joshua, Purim is celebrated on the 15th of the month of Adar, and on what is known as Shushan Purim, since fighting in the walled city of Shushan continued through the 14th day of Adar. Today, only in Jerusalem is Purim observed on the 15th, and several other biblical settlements, such as Hebron and Shiloh. It is celebrated on both dates because of doubts regarding their status as cities surrounded by a wall. Since the days of Joshua, some also celebrate both in Prague and Baghdad. Back to the text. At the same time, Bahram Shakrok presented himself as brave and cheeky. Bahram Shakrok repeatedly made barbed remarks about Reza Shah, the by now thoroughly detested ruler. Following angry protests from Reza Shah, who was a regular listener of the German radio station, at the end of 1940, the German Foreign Office had to take Shakrok off air, but only temporarily. In August 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union occupied Iran, which sympathized with Germany, in order to create a land bridge for the delivery of arms to the Soviet Union, arms without which the Battle of Stalingrad would not have been won. The occupying powers ousted Reza Shah Pahlavi from his throne and installed his son, Muhammad Reza Shah, in his stead. Shortly thereafter, Shakrok was back on air. However, even though the British-Soviet coup had put an end to the flirtation between Tehran and Berlin, the situation of the Iranian Jews remained insecure. Already under Reza Shah, the effects of Nazi propaganda had impacted their daily life. Quote, teachers were sacked along with holders of government offices or employees of state railways. School children were expelled from the public schools and refused places in public universities, unquote. Moreover, after the deposition of Raza Shah, the mass of the population fervently awaited the German invasion of Iran envisaged by Hitler, hoping that it would put an end to the hated British Soviet occupation. Now the Nazis' radio propaganda was more than just commentary on the war. It was an instrument in the service of the, quote, liberation, in quote, of Iran by German forces. Quote, in those days, swastikas were painted on the walls of many houses in Tehran. Bazaar traders sold pictures of Hitler. The new Shah recalled that, quote, the German, propaganda was very effective, The propagandists always depicted Hitler as a Muslim and descendant of the Prophet. Hitler was said to have been born with a green band around his body. End quote. Footnote. See Cyrus L. Sulzberger auf schmalen Straßen durch die dunkle Nacht. Back to the text and footnote. As the U.S. ambassador in Iran, Louis Dreyfus, reported in May 1942, quote, German propaganda, made a deep impression on the masses. The daily radio broadcasts from Berlin had been particularly effective, and a film audience in the poor section of Tehran had cheered wildly for Hitler, and at decidedly the wrong places when a British war film was shown. At one point, the British pressured the Iranian police to remove all radios from public places, but they were quickly restored, again at British request, when it was found strange that one could not tune in the British broadcast either without a radio. End quote. Louis Dreyfus. Wikipedia says Louis G. Dreyfus Jr. lived from 1889 to 1973 and was an American diplomat. As an experienced diplomat, Louis G. Dreyfus served twice as United States ambassador to Afghanistan. At different times, his career at the Department of State ultimately lasted more than 40 years. Back to the text. Footnote. The Great Powers in the Middle East by Barry Rubin. Barry Rubin, The Great Powers in the Middle East, 1941 to 1947, The Road to the Cold War. The description says, the objective of this study is to reconstruct the difficulty faced by American and British policymakers in determining the capabilities and intentions of their two main wartime allies regarding the Middle East. Specifically, it seeks to explore the role of great power relations in the Middle East and the breakdown of the wartime alliance and the origins of the Cold War. Back to the text and footnote. Following the coup of August 1941, the radio provided the only way of getting news about the Axis. Although action is being taken to make effective the ban on public listening to Axis broadcasts, it seems that listening in private houses is still widely practiced. As a result, it appears that many people are still convinced that the Axis powers will win the war. Hitler, moreover, is said to enjoy great personal popularity, end quote, reported the BBC in June 1942. At the same time, after the fall of Reza Shah, who, despite his admiration for Hitler, did not share the latter's anti-Semitism, Jew hatred began to play a greater role in the season broadcasts. This fell on the fertile soil of Iranian anti-Judaism. Indeed, under Shiite rule, the Jews had fared even worse than in the Sunni sphere. Only in the post-16th century Iran had the Jews been deemed najes, parenthesis, quote, unclean, end quote, in parenthesis, so that they were forbidden to leave the house when it rained or snowed in order to prevent their, quote, uncleanness, end quote, from polluting Muslims. Ayatollah Khomeini gave expression to this radical Shiite anti-Judaism in a widely disseminated basic guide for Muslims. Quote, there are 11 things which make unclean. 1. Urine. 2. Feces. 3. Sperm. 4. Carrion. 5. Blood. 6. Dog. 7. Pig. 8. Unbeliever. 9. Wine. 10. Beer. 11. The sweat of a camel which eats unclean things, end quote. In a comment on point 8, unbeliever, Khomeini adds, quote, the entire body of the unbeliever is unclean, even his hair and nails and body moistures are unclean, end quote. While in the above-cited passage he places Christians and Jews on the same level as dogs and pigs, and so disparages both to the maximum extent, on other occasions he would present the Jews alone as uniquely dangerous to the future of Islam. Quote, we see today that the Jews, parenthesis, may God curse them, in parenthesis, have meddled with the text of the Quran, end quote. He wrote in his most important work, The Islamic State, published in 1971. Quote, today we see the Jews, may God curse them, have meddled with the text of the Quran, end quote. Khomeini wrote in his most important work, The Islamic State, published in 1971, quote, the Jews and their foreign backers are opposed to the very foundations of Islam and wish to establish Jewish domination throughout the world. Since they are a cunning and resourceful group of people, I fear that, God forbid, they may one day achieve their goal. End quote. Footnote. Ruhollah Khomeini, Program for the Establishment of an Islamic Government. In Islam and Revolution, the Writings and Declarations of Imam Khomeini, translated and annotated by Ahmed Algar. One second, just want to copy this down. Sorry about that. Such fantasies about Jewish world domination. Sorry, did I say footnote? Footnote. See Ruhollah Khomeini. I wanted to look up Islam and Revolution, the writings and declarations of Imam Khomeini. This unprecedented collection in English of notable works by Imam Khomeini, ranging in date from 1941 to 1980, makes it possible for non-Iranians to become directly acquainted with his ideas and to examine the convictions that underlay this indomitable man. I don't know if there's a typo in this description. He was undeniably one of the most important figures of the age, not only for his role as principal strategist of a successful revolutionary movement and supervisor of the Islamic order it ushered in, but also for his unhesitating promotion of what he saw as a global Islamic mission, the union of all Muslim peoples. End footnote. Or back to the text and footnote. Such fantasies about Jewish world domination are not part of the Shiite tradition. Here, Khomeini has adopted a key idea of European anti-Semitism and linked it to his religion-based anti-Judaism. Khomeini had been a regular listener to the Nazis' wartime Farsi language broadcast, and although it cannot in retrospect be proven, it would seem obvious that his fantasy had been shaped by a 6-year-long barrage this 6-year-long barrage of anti-Semitic propaganda. Khomeini's great campaigns of the 1960s that made the later revolutionary leader famous throughout Iran were conducted under the sign of Islamic antisemitism. Quote, Israel does not wish the Quran to exist in this country, end quote. Khomeini roared in June 1963 to tens of thousands of people who had streamed into Qum. Quote, Israel does not wish the, quote, ulama to exist in this country. Israel does not wish to see Islamic precepts in this country, end quote. Khomeini. At the climax of the speech, Khomeini also personally attacked the Shah. Quote, what exactly is the relationship between the Shah and Israel? ... Can it be that the Shah is an Israeli? Does the Secret Service believe him to be Jewish? End quote. Khomeini finally introduced the threat of excommunication. Quote, shall I declare you, Mr. Shah, to be a heathen so that you are chased out of this country? End quote. Khomeini. Footnote. See the Institute for the Compilation and Publication of the Works of Imam Khomeini, edited Qatar, Volume 1, Tehran, 1995. Add footnote. The image of the Jew. Oh shit! What did I want to look up? Ulama. Ulama. In Islam, the ulama, the learned ones, are scholars of Islamic doctrine and law. The ulama are considered the guardians, transmitters, and interpreters of religious knowledge in Islam. Quote, ulama may refer broadly to the educated class of such religious scholars, including theologians, canon lawyers, muftis, judges, qadis, professors, and high state religious officials. Alternatively, quote, ulama may refer specifically to those holding governmental positions in an Islamic state. By long-standing tradition, ulama are educated in religious institutions, madrasas. The Quran and Sunnah, parenthesis, authentic hadith, in parentheses, are the scriptural sources of traditional Islamic law. Back to the text. The image of the Jew as the enemy permeates Khomeini's early writings. Thus, the following extract from his foreword to the Islamic State could easily have been written by Amin al-Husseini or Sayyid Qutb. Quote, "From the very beginning, the historical movement of Islam had to contend with the Jews, for it was the Jews who first established anti-Islamic propaganda and engaged in various stratagems, and as you can see, this activity continues down to the present." End quote. Khomeini recalls that the Prophet Muhammad had hundreds of members of the Jewish Qurayza tribe beheaded and praises him for this. Quote, "When he, the Prophet, gave orders for the conquest of a certain area, the burning of a certain place, or the destruction of a certain group whose existence was harmful for Islam, the Muslims, and mankind in general, his orders were just. Since the Jews of Bani Qurayza were a troublesome group, the most noble messenger, parenthesis, peace and blessings be upon him, and parenthesis, eliminated them," end quote. End quote. In a classic case of projection of his own megalomania, Khomeini was convinced that he was called upon to fight against the establishment of Jewish world domination. Quote, "Can you not see that the Israelis are attacking, killing, and destroying the British, and Americans are helping them, ... Islam is being wiped out, ... Wake up, exclamation point," end quote. Khomeini addressed these words to the Iranian clergy, whom he derided as, quote, pseudo-saints, end quote. Hidden behind Khomeini's attack on Israel lay a fundamental divide within Islam. On the one side were those clerics who advocated the abolition of Sharia and the adaptation of Islam to modernity, so supported the Shah's modernizing reforms, including the introduction of votes for women. On the other side were those who, like Khomeini and his successors, sought to defend an interpretation of the religious law based on a literal reading of text and the example of the time of Muhammad against the temptations of the social model of liberal democracy. Khomeini railed against those who introduced, quote, an evil innovationist to Islam, claiming to be acting in accordance with the requirements of Islamic justice, end quote. With such modernizers in mind, Khomeini called for a holy war to begin among Muslims. Thus, Khomeini's 1971 book calls for the religious teaching institutions to be reformed in order to remove, quote, the traces left on the people's minds and spirits by the insinuating propaganda of the foreigners, end quote. Khomeini. Such statements reveal the aim of Khomeini's return to Muhammad and struggle with the Jews, the wish to repudiate all aspects of modernity that undermine his conservative conception of concept of Islam. This connection between anti-Semitism and anti-modernism also explains the popularity of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is of Russian origin, in the Islamic world. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was conceived as a rallying cry against liberalism in order to drive forward the struggle against individual freedom. Individual freedom is denounced as the main tool of global Jewish conspiracy. Ideas originally disseminated 100 years previously by Tsarist agents in order to save Tsardom are today being repeated by key leaders of Islam in order to promote the domination of conservative Islam. One second, let me copy that down. Back to the text. Between April 1939 and April 1945, the Nazi radio station in Berlin had promoted that, quote, promoted that very, quote, return to the religious traditions of Islam, end quote, and the related, quote, fierce opposition to Western liberalism, end quote. But Khomeini later espoused and warned against the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine as the worst possible catastrophe. This propaganda was one of the reasons why it was not an Ataturk-style modernism that prevailed in the Arab part of the Islamic world, but a conservative interpretation of the Quran and Islamic antisemitism. The shortwave radio transmitter in season appears in retrospect at the interface across which the anti-Semitic worldview streamed to the consciousness of the Arab masses. Radio season fell silent in 1945, but its frequencies of hate continued to resound in the Arab world. That's the end of the piece. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for letting me pause and for all the annoying things that go along with hearing me read. Thanks. Bye-bye.